Welcome to Secrets in the Shadows. I'm Charlotte, and today we are diving deep into one of the most horrifying cases in American history, the Green River Killer. If you love true crime and want to hear more cases like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Now let's begin. You're a loser, you're a coward, you're a nobody, you're an animal. These are the words spoken by the grieving relatives of the Green River Killer's victims, words filled with pain, rage, and unimaginable loss. "May God have mercy on your pathetic soul," one family member said, "because the rest of us who know the truth about you won't. The most prolific serial murderer America has ever known. His 19-year reign of terror left the area surrounding Seattle littered with corpses. I don't wish for him to die," another victim's relative said. "I wish for him to have a long, suffering, cruel death." But who was the Green River Killer, and was he born to kill? When he went through the door and left to go to work, he wasn't the man that his wife knew. He wasn't the man his son thought he was. He was something far more sinister. Gary Ridgway was born on February 18, 1949, in Salt Lake City, Utah. He grew up in SeaTac, Washington, in what seemed like a normal home. But inside those walls, something disturbing was happening. Ridgway's father was a bus driver, his mother a sales clerk, but his relationship with his mother was different. He later claimed that after wetting the bed, a habit that continued into his early teens, his mother would wash his genitals. He felt ashamed, but also aroused. The confusion planted dark thoughts in his mind. At just 16 years old, he gave in to those violent urges. He lured a 6-year-old boy into the woods and stabbed him in the ribs. The boy survived, but Ridgway walked away without consequence. He later admitted he stabbed the boy simply to see what it felt like, and that was only the beginning. Despite this, he was never arrested. Instead, he graduated high school at 20, enlisted in the Navy, and served in Vietnam. While deployed, he frequently visited prostitutes, contracting an STD that enraged him. This anger would fuel his future crimes. Ridgway married 3 times, fathered a son, and worked as a truck painter for over 30 years. But behind this facade of normalcy, he was stalking and killing women. His third wife, Judith Mawson, described him as the perfect husband. He treated her like a newlywed, even after 17 years together. But Ridgway later admitted that he had been tempted to kill her, only stopping because it might have led to his arrest. Mawson, horrified, later said she believed she saved lives just by keeping him happy. Ridgway targeted vulnerable women, runaways, and sex workers, luring them into his truck, sometimes even showing them pictures of his son to gain their trust. Then he would strangle them, often mid-intercourse, and dump their bodies in remote wooded areas. Some he revisited, engaging in necrophilia. To mislead investigators, he planted cigarette butts and gum at the crime scenes, even though he didn't smoke or chew gum. He would later admit to dumping some bodies in one location and later moving them to another just to confuse the police. Ridgway claimed he had a strategy. He deliberately chose victims from areas that had little police presence, and he learned from past mistakes, refining his methods as time went on. He also maintained a full-time job and a seemingly stable life, making him an unlikely suspect. By 1982, the Green River Task Force had been formed, but Ridgway was always one step ahead. The FBI classified him as an organized serial killer, meaning he planned and executed his murders with precision. Despite multiple encounters with law enforcement, he remained under the radar. In 1983, He was questioned after witnesses saw a sex worker getting into his truck. He passed a polygraph test, fooling investigators. 2 years later, they obtained a search warrant for his home and workplace, collecting fibers, ropes, and a saliva swab. But forensic technology at the time couldn't link him to the crime scenes. At one point, detectives turned to an unlikely source for help: Ted Bundy. Bundy, from his prison cell, correctly predicted that the Green River Killer revisited the dump sites to commit necrophilia. He advised police to stake out fresh graves, suggesting that Ridgway likely enjoyed reliving his crimes. Despite this, Ridgway continued his killing spree, outsmarting investigators for nearly 2 decades. Ridgway's victims were women, many of whom were young and vulnerable. Some were just teenagers. Marcia Chapman, age 31, Opal Mills, age 16, Cynthia Hines, age 17, Mary Meehan, age 18, was 8 months pregnant when she was murdered. Linda Rule, age 16, Marie Malvar, age 18, was last seen getting into his truck. Deborah Estes, age 15, Lori Ann Raspotnik, age 15, disappeared, and her remains were identified in December 2023. Tammy Lyles, age 16, was identified on January 2024. These women were daughters, sisters, and mothers. Many had troubled pasts, but they deserved life. Instead, they became part of Ridgway's twisted killing spree. Then, in 2001, science caught up with Gary Ridgway. Advances in DNA technology linked him to multiple victims. He was finally arrested. Initially, Ridgway denied everything. But when confronted with irrefutable DNA evidence, he changed his story. He sat across from investigators and admitted, "I've been lying to you all. I killed them all." In 2003, he took a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. He confessed to 48 murders, but claimed to have killed over 80. As part of the deal, he led investigators to the remains of several victims who had never been found. His sentence? 48 life terms, plus 480 additional years for tampering with evidence. It was the longest sentence ever handed down in Washington state history. Even in prison, he remained emotionless. When the families of his victims spoke during his sentencing, pouring out their pain and fury, he barely reacted. The father of one victim chose to forgive him, saying, "There are people here who hate you. I am not one of them." Even today, his crimes still haunt us. In September 2024, Ridgway was transferred from the Washington State Penitentiary to the King County Jail. The reasons for the move remain unclear, but one thing is certain: he will never walk free again. There are still believed to be unidentified victims. Investigators fear that some of the women he killed may never be found, their fates lost to time. Ridgway himself said, "I killed so many women, I have a hard time keeping them straight." The true number of Ridgway's victims may never be known. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into one of the most horrifying cases in true crime history. If you want more cases like this, subscribe to Secrets in the Shadows. Until next time, stay safe. And remember, monsters don't always lurk in the dark. Sometimes they live among us.